Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're sifting through a recent, pretty detailed interview with Elon Musk.
Yeah, our job is to pull out the main takeaways for you, kind of connect the dots.
And we're going to focus a bit, particularly on his comments about this government advisory role he has, Doge, and also what's happening with Starlink.
Exactly. He touched on a lot, as usual, but Doge and Starlink offer some, well, pretty interesting insights into his current activities and thinking.
Okay, let's start there then, with Doge. He said he's dedicating, what, about 1 or 2 days a week to this?
That's what he mentioned, yeah.
So what did he say this role actually, involves? What is Doge, according to him?
He described it as kind of like an internal review group for the government. The idea is they look at different government organizations, their contracts, and basically ask, is this still relevant? Is it cost effective?
So trying to find savings, essentially. Root out waste.
Pretty much identify where taxpayer money might be, not used efficiently. Then they make recommendations based on that to the relevant secretaries.
Right. And he was quite firm about it not being a conflict of interest, even though his companies, like SpaceX, have big government contracts.
He pushed back on that, yeah. His argument was twofold, really. First, it's purely advisory, Doge recommends, but the secretaries decide. They don't have to follow the advice.
Okay. And the second point?
Transparency. He mentioned a public website, an X handle, basically saying all the work and outcomes are out there. His logic is, if there was any funny business like unfairly steering contracts towards his companies, it would be pretty obvious and someone would have flagged it by now. He claims no one has.
What about the other side of that, though? The idea that maybe he gets insight into what competitors are doing through this role?
Yeah, that concern came up. He countered by saying Doge's focus is squarely on the government organizations, their efficiency, their spending, value for money. He claims it's not about digging into the specifics of what, say, another aerospace company is doing or their contracts. It's about the government side of the equation.
Got it. Now, there was this huge target mentioned, saving at least $2 trillion before the election. That sounds ambitious.
Extremely ambitious. And he did mention a current figure, I think $170 billion in reported savings so far.
But he seemed a bit maybe frustrated when the interviewing kept pressing on the $2 trillion figure.
Yeah, he did. His point was that hitting that number isn't just up to Doge. It depends heavily on, Congress and the executive branch actually acting on the recommendations. They can point out the savings, but they can't force the changes needed to realize them.
So he felt the focus on the big number missed the complexity.
Kind of. He actually used a video game term, NPC dialogue tree.
Right, like the interviewer was stuck on one script.
Exactly. Suggesting the questioning was a bit simplistic, maybe not acknowledging the political realities involved in making those kinds of cuts or changes. He seemed to want the focus on the effort itself, the value in trying to save money.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's pivot now to Starlink. He was very specific about what SpaceX does in this area.
Yeah, he drew some clear lines: rockets, satellites, and the internet terminals people use on the ground. That's the focus.
And explicitly not drones or weapons.
Explicitly not. He stated they aren't in the drone business and have no desire to be in the weapons business. A clarification may be needed given, the dual-use nature of some space tech.
He also talked about SpaceX's launch dominance and the scale of Starlink. The numbers were pretty wild.
They really were. He threw out a projection, something like SpaceX handling maybe 90% of all orbital launches this year. 90%.
Wow. And the number of satellites?
He said something like 80% of all active satellites currently in orbit are theirs, which just shows you the scale of the Starlink constellation and their lead in, providing global internet connectivity from space.
It's hard to even picture that scale.
It really is. Think about one company controlling most of the infrastructure for a global service like that.
And he clearly sees this as a huge positive, right? Especially for underserved parts of the world.
Absolutely. He talked a lot about the impact of bringing low-cost, high-bandwidth internet to places that never had it. His argument is pretty straightforward. Access to information, education, online commerce. It's a powerful tool for lifting people out of poverty. It connects them to the global economy, to knowledge.
And he thanked the countries that have approved it, 130 currently, he said.
Yes, 130. He framed it as a key enabler for development.
Now, the idea of Starlink going public came up. Is that happening soon?
He sort of left the door open for the future, but definitely no rush. He seemed quite wary of the downsides of being a public company.
Like what? What were his concerns?
The usual overhead, regulatory stuff.
Yeah.
But he specifically and quite strongly criticized shareholder lawsuits in the U.S. He called a lot of them frivolous, driven by law firms just looking for settlements, not necessarily genuine shareholder issues.
Did he offer any solution or alternative?
He actually mentioned a recent Texas law. Apparently, it tries to address this by requiring a higher threshold of shareholder agreement before a class action derivative suit can even be filed. He seemed to approve of that direction.
Interesting. Okay, then there was this discussion about South Africa. It sounded complicated, something about black ownership rules.
Yeah, that was a tricky part of the conversation. Starlink wants to operate there, but faces hurdles related to South Africa's broad-based black economic empowerment laws.
How did he frame that?
Well, he questioned the premise of what he termed racist laws, arguing for equal treatment for all races, invoking Nelson Mandela's vision. He pointed out that the current laws have race-based preferences, and then highlighted his own situation as a non-black South African, suggesting these rules could potentially block him from getting a license.
So did he say if they'd found a way around it or if the government was helping?
He was asked directly if it seemed right for the government to potentially find a workaround for its own rules to let Starlink in, but he didn't give a straight yes or no. He sort of sidestepped it by going back to his broader point about wanting laws that treat everyone equally, regardless of race. It was quite carefully worded.
Yeah. It sounds like navigating international regulations can be as complex as launching rockets.
Seems that way sometimes, doesn't it?
Okay, let's touch on a couple of other points briefly. AI regulation, is he still pushing for that?
He still believes some regulation is needed, yeah. Like having referees on the field was his analogy. But he cautioned against overregulation stifling innovation. His critique was more that current regulations often heavily burden established industries, while new, potentially riskier fields like AI are, in his view, underregulated.
And the lawsuit against OpenAI, still ongoing.
Very much so. He reiterated his original vision for it nonprofit, open source contrasting it sharply with its current for-profit, closed-source direction. He used the analogy of funding a rainforest preservation group that then turns into a lumber company. That's clearly how he sees it.
Quite a strong analogy. He also had some sharp words about USAID cuts and comments made by Bill Gates.
Yes, he strongly disagreed with Gates' concern that cuts to USAID would cost millions of lives. He basically challenged Gates to show the evidence, claiming it was false. Musk argued that the useful parts of USAID were transferred to the State Department, not just deleted. He also mentioned experiencing what he believed was fraud or graft in some aid organizations, making it hard to verify their impact claims.
What about specific programs like PEPFAR for HIV/AIDS?
When that specific example came up, Musk stated the medication aspect was continuing, challenging the premise that is being cut. When pressed on prevention services possibly being affected, he asked for specifics, saying something like, "Tell me what and I'll fix it right now," expressing willingness to re-examine if shown clear evidence of a problem.
Okay. And politically, any plans for major spending this cycle?
He said he intends to do a lot less this time around. Kind of felt like he'd done enough, though he didn't completely rule it out if the specific reason came up.
And any truth to reports of regular talks with President Putin?
He flatly denied that. So there was one video call maybe 5 years ago, that's it. He was very critical of the Wall Street Journal for reporting otherwise, calling it the worst newspaper in the world. He clarified that a supposed challenge to Putin was just a post on X, not a direct conversation.
Wow. Okay. So looking ahead, he called this year pivotal. What were the big things he highlighted for the near future?
He kind of said every year feels pivotal, but yeah, he listed some major goals for this year or early next. Getting Starship fully reusable, catching both the booster and the ship, which he sees as fundamental for making life multiplanetary. That's a huge one for SpaceX.
What else? Neuralink.
Yep. Helping more patients restore capabilities via their telepathy implants. And aiming for the first implant to restore sight, possibly by year-end or early next, maybe happening in the UAE.
And AI, self-driving.
He mentioned being close to AGI, or digital superintelligence, and launching fully unsupervised autonomy self-driving cars with no one inside starting in Austin, he said, next month.
So reusable rockets, brain implants, true self-driving, maybe AGI, just the usual stuff.
Pretty much standard fare for him, it seems.
Yeah.
But the pace and ambition are undeniable.
So wrapping this up, we've seen Musk defending his government advisory role as a transparent efficiency drive, pushing Starlink's global reach while navigating regulatory hurdles and potential public offerings, and still driving hard on these incredibly ambitious tech frontiers like reusable rockets and AI.
Exactly. It's a picture of someone operating across multiple, really high-stakes domains simultaneously, challenging norms, and setting, well, astronomical goals.
It definitely gives you a lot to chew on. And maybe here's a thought to leave you with. What does it mean when a single private individual holds this kind of influence, advising governments on spending, building global communication networks, pioneering AI, and planning interplanetary life? Consider the potential benefits of that focused drive, but also, maybe, the potential risks of such concentrated power and vision. Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.